Great. Okay, so we are on lecture 16, and we're going to finish off just the last bit in the first sort of 20 minutes of class, the last bit of lecture 15, and then move on to the new material for lecture 16 on a new topic, economic and climate shocks in rural households. So we're going to talk about a bunch of different issues there. We talked about this last time, midterms on Tuesday, here in class. Definitely try to make it. Three types of questions: short essay questions, theoretical model questions, and more sort of applied economic. Is this somebody's on here, by the way? I don't want to trip on it. And then applied econometric questions. I think we went through some of the discussion last time. Bring pens, pencils, whatever. I'll bring the exams, and it'll work out. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's an interesting idea. I could do some graphical stuff. I hadn't thought of that. Yeah, maybe I could do graphical stuff. Thanks. What's your name? Tell everybody your name. And sorry. Yeah, maybe graphical stuff. Maybe the equations. Definitely the Solow model. There's equations and some graphical stuff. But definitely even if I didn't do graphical stuff, if you understand the equations, you understand what's going on, some graphical stuff could be useful actually. So maybe I'll do that. I mean, most of the stuff we did in lecture, we went through, for, I think, part of 2 different lectures, we went through some of the solution of when people engage in safe sex or unsafe sex under a couple of different conditions. Like we modified the model in 2 or 3 ways, but I also mentioned maybe a few other potential ways you could modify the model. And so those would be the kinds of things that I might ask about. I'm going to do something a little different than exactly what's on the slides. I'll make some modification, but if you understand what we did in lecture and understand the concepts, then you should be able to solve it. So I'm thinking mainly the equations, although maybe I'll do something graphical or something else. I hadn't thought of that. So any other questions? Yeah. Yeah, IV will not be on the midterm. I'll just say that. The IV stuff will not be on the midterm. We're going to cover the IV in more depth in a couple lectures, and it would be something that could be on the final, for instance. But IV will not be on the midterm. I was just touching on it to kind of introduce the idea. And really, like the first part of lecture today will be on the midterm, and the latter half of lecture is sort of the second half of the course. Once we get to the sort of economic and climate shocks. Yeah. I forget when. Where is Jonas? Do you know where the review section is going to be?
Yes, it's 5 o'clock on Monday.
Room 2050 in the Valley Life Sciences building. You'll send something through the courses? Okay, that's great. I think he said 2015 or 2050? 2050 in the Valley Life Sciences building, Monday at 5. Okay, any other questions? All right, awesome. So let's go on and finish our discussion. Last time we were talking about the sort of non-labor market impacts of education, focusing on girls who are getting more schooling through the Girls Scholarship Program, and we were interested in this broad question of whether schooling leads to some forms of empowerment of these adolescent girls. I went through these results last time, but just to summarize, I was just getting to these in the last couple minutes of lecture. There's evidence that the girls who are in the Girls Scholarship Program treatment schools are more knowledgeable about politics, that they read the newspaper more, that they can name cabinet ministers and government officials better than people in the control group. And there's several different statements that have to do with satisfaction with government, satisfaction with the economy, some that you can think of as respect for authority, like a question saying we should show more respect for authority. And in all those cases, there's less respect for authority, less satisfaction among the treatment school girls. So the girls that were getting more education, reading the newspaper more, were more informed about politics, were also less satisfied about politics. And that's a pretty interesting pattern. One question you should think about or have in your mind is how general is that pattern? If there were a case where there were better functioning democratic institutions or a government that was less corrupt than the government in Kenya, et cetera, then maybe as people became more informed, they would react differently. Maybe they would have more respect for governmental authority. Maybe. That's one possibility. Or maybe there's just something about being more educated and empowered that makes one more critical. So we can't answer that question in our data, but there's a very clear pattern here that respect for authority and satisfaction fall in the treatment school. Maybe something you didn't expect. What doesn't change, so that first slide was things that change. What doesn't change is a bunch of other elements of identity and attitudes that some of the theories predicted. So last time, towards the end of the lecture, I talked about these different views about what education does. And one of the views is what I call the modernization view, which is this sort of catch-all set of theories which says as people become more educated, they become more liberal or progressive or modern, that's where it comes from, along a whole range of dimensions. So maybe they're less attached to their local ethnic community, and they think in broader terms. Maybe they're less attached to their religious community, and they think in more universalist terms. It turns out that there is no change along those dimensions in the data. So it isn't like becoming educated makes people care less about belonging to their ethnic group. And that's something that people often think. I think there's this knee-jerk response that maybe a lot of ethnic and social divisions are just due to ignorance, and if only people were a little more educated, they wouldn't have these ethnic biases. But that isn't the case here. So these girls in the treatment schools are just as sort of ethnically and religiously attached as less educated people. Even more interesting is the link with attitudes towards democracy. So in modernization theory, there's this strong presumption that more educated people are going to be more pro-democracy. That somehow being educated would make one appreciate the value of broad citizenship, democracy, participation, free media, all that kind of stuff. Whereas less educated people may be more attached to traditional forms of authority, dictatorship, these sort of older forms of governance. Well, these young women don't become any more supportive in their statements of democracy, even though they have more education. That's pretty interesting. A lot of people have been surprised when we presented those findings. They would have thought more educated people would be more supportive of democracy. And then the other one is there's a sense that maybe when people are more educated, they'll be more likely to vote, they'll be more likely to get involved in political affairs and rallies and all these other things. But again, there's no relationship there for these young women. So it isn't like when people become more educated, they become these like amazing democratic citizens that are out there voting and protesting and supporting their institutions and whatnot. Think about the democratic finding here. I just said on the previous slide that people are much more critical of their institutions when they get more educated. So it doesn't look like they're running out to embrace involvement in those institutions. They're not getting more involved in politics. So this is a set of findings that are all inconsistent with this very simple modernization view, that just somehow mechanically when people become educated, they kind of reinforce democratic institutions both through their attitudes and through their behavior. That doesn't come through in this data. Now, again, on all these findings, we'll say, are these results general? They may not be. Women are, we said, underrepresented in Kenyan office in terms of elected leaders. Maybe results would be different for men who feel somehow more attached to the political process because more men are leading political parties and leading government. That's possible. Maybe results would be different even in other parts of Kenya. I haven't talked too much about it, but this region in Western Kenya was in the opposition to the government at the time. They were basically like a stronghold for the opposition party. So maybe if you're in the stronghold of the opposition party and you get more informed and educated and empowered, you don't run out and talk about how much you love the government. You get empowered to talk about how critical you are about the government because you're in this opposition stronghold region. That's one possibility. So it could be that in other regions of Kenya that were more supportive at baseline of the government, you get some sort of different response. The most sort of surprising result we got, and I don't want to kind of overplay it, it's really just one number and it's a stated opinion in a question, but it's still pretty interesting. Young women in the girls' scholarship schools are more likely to say that they're supportive of political violence than the girls in the control school. So this again sort of goes against our knee-jerk view that when you become more educated, you're going to kind of move away from using violence. That violence is somehow the domain of the less educated, the ignorant, etc. Now, it isn't like these girls were using violence. It's just in a survey they were asked a question, is it sometimes necessary to use violence in support of a just cause? And these girls are a little bit more, 3% on a base of 47%. So again, not a huge effect, but they're more likely to say yes. So it's kind of going in the opposite direction of what we would have expected. And in fact, when I polled you guys at the end of class last time, the vast majority of you thought the more educated girls in the treatment group would be less likely to support the use of violence. And that was our presumption as well. Martin.
You also mentioned that, the theory that more educated youth led to the arts break. That's,
Exactly.
some kind of violence towards something that's
That's right. So there are all these conflicting views. So I mentioned there was the modernization view. There was a view that education leads people to sort of fall in line behind the authorities. There's a view that education empowers people to challenge authority. And then there was kind of some gender-specific views that education is particularly important for women, to empower women. So there are these clashing views that in some ways are inconsistent. And it's certainly the case that in a lot of the popular portrayals of the Arab Spring, the role of this educated urban youth population was really central to the discussion in a number of countries. So this kind of view is sort of consistent with what we've seen in those settings. That this newly educated urban population might not just always throw flower petals out and kind of, it's not like San Francisco 1969 or something like that. It's not always going to work. Berkeley, it's not always going to be that way. But in this case, we were very surprised by this. We might have thought there'd be zero effect or it would go the other direction, but it's sort of going in what we thought is unexpected direction. Like you're saying, there's some links to the real world. Does anybody else have any reactions or thoughts on this sort of finding? Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. 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 That seems like a really coherent way to think about it. Yeah, Radhika. The follow-up survey was done between 2005 and early 2007. So it's sort of about a year to a year and a half before the December 2007 presidential election. So it's still kind of a bit before the election. Some of the surveying was going on. It's interesting. Some of the surveying was going on when there was a vote. The government, and again, this is an opposition region, in 2005, so when we were sort of just starting the surveying, the government was trying to push through a constitutional reform that would strengthen the ruling party and sort of undermine the position of the dominant party in this region. And that constitution was defeated in a nationwide referendum, with people in this region voting very strongly against it. So there was a lot of organizing sort of in opposition to the government during some of the surveying. So in addition to being an opposition region, it was an opposition region at this time of kind of rallying against the regime. So that could be part of the story. Okay, so what's, I think the comment before is really how we interpret it, which is saying, who are these girls? They're more politically aware. They can answer more objective questions. They know more objectively about politics. They're less satisfied. They're more skeptical about what's going on, maybe because they are more informed. They're actually learning that the system isn't working that well for them. And they might not see an ability to really change Kenya. So that same opposition party that I talked about, that they support, the leader of that party, it's a complicated story. We're going to get into some Kenyan politics in a few weeks. But in the previous election in 2002, the leader of the party supported in this region threw his weight behind the guy who became president. They later split. But he threw his weight behind him and really helped Mwai Kibaki win the presidency, the guy who was the president at the time. They signed a public memorandum of understanding that the leader from this region, Odinga, would become prime minister. There had been no prime minister position before. They signed it in front of the cameras, in front of the media, saying if Kibaki wins, because Odinga has supported him and thrown his whole base behind him, Kibaki will make Odinga prime minister. 3 days after becoming president, Kibaki just openly denied that agreement, sort of like went against that agreement, said, no, I'm not going to make him prime minister. So he just totally double-crossed people in this region. So people were pissed. So you could see, maybe they felt like, hey, we cut a deal, we got this guy in power, and now he screwed us over, and we kind of have nothing we can do about it other than wait till the next election. So you can kind of see why people in this region would be like, yeah, I don't really trust the government. I don't really like the government. And in fact, it's not enough to win through the ballot box or kind of be decisive in an election. We still got screwed over. Maybe we need to turn to violence. So that is, part of it. Now, in some ways, it gets even worse than this. And let me give a little bit more background on Kenya just to give you guys a sense of where this is coming from. One view is, as these girls, these young women, they're like 15, they were 13 to 15 at the start, so now they're like 4 or 5 years old. They're like in their late teens now. They're young women. Maybe they're just more realistic about Kenyan politics at this point. In the 1950s, Kenya became independent from the UK when it did, in part because of an armed uprising. There were a lot of English people that wanted to turn Kenya into South Africa and make it a white settler colony. And Kenyans fought the British and basically forced them out. Okay, so violence worked at that point in Kenyan history. Just after we did our polling, our surveying, so we finished in early 2007. In December 2007, there was an election between those two guys I mentioned before, Kibaki the president and Odinga the opposition leader. All the opinion polls, pre-election polls and exit polls showed Odinga winning, the opposition leader from this region. 2 days into the vote count, the vote counting stopped mysteriously, and a day later, the new returns showed the president winning again. There's just tons of proof that they rigged the election. So yet again, it turned out there wasn't enough to win at the ballot box because the election was rigged. So maybe these young women saying, yeah, the only way to sort of get change in Kenya is through violence isn't completely crazy in this context. Odinga ran again in the election last year and lost again after further election irregularity. So people in this region of the country keep losing close elections that they might have won, that they probably won. So if you're in that sort of setting and you become more informed about your politics, maybe you don't become more peaceful. Maybe you become more pissed off, basically. And it basically looks like the treatment group in the Girls Scholarship Program are dissatisfied, upset, and not particularly sold on Kenyan institutions. Again, that may not generalize. And I want you to think about this with all the studies we look at. Maybe in another setting where institutions are working well, where you can sort of fairly compete in the democratic process, then maybe as you become more informed, you become more attached to your institutions. You feel like, hey, these institutions are working. My government's working for me. Maybe. Not really in this case in Kenya. Okay, let me pause for a second, see if there's any other thoughts or reactions to these patterns. There is a little bit of surveying from other projects on this link between education and political attitudes, but most of the existing studies focus on this link between education and democracy rather than violence attitudes. And in a lot of the existing surveys, more educated people look more supportive of democracy, or there's sort of a weak relationship, but generally positive. Now, there's some issues with existing studies, which is in those studies, education is not randomly assigned. It isn't like this case, so it's unclear what the omitted variables are. But Or maybe, again, these sort of marginalized, regionally marginalized young women in one part of Kenya are just reacting differently than a lot of other people elsewhere. But the conventional wisdom has always been more education means more support for democracy. But we don't see it in any of our, I think, 5 or 6 democracy questions that we have. They don't show any more support for democracy, even though they have more schooling, they go to school more, they do better on tests, they clearly have more education. Okay. So just to wrap up, the bottom line is education really can affect things beyond just your labor market outcomes. It can affect your social attitudes, it can affect your political attitudes, it can affect how likely you are to choose your own spouse. And in that sense, you could see for this population of pretty marginalized young women in Kenya, education was empowering in a certain sense. It led them to question their place in the world, their place in the family, question their political institutions, and that's empowerment in some sense, being able to say, I disagree with the status quo. But whether that translates into better functioning democratic institutions in some orderly way, or some sort of uprising, like an Arab Spring style uprising, or political violence like we saw in Kenya in 2007, is unclear. And there might not be some simple relationship. It may depend on the setting. So let's transition now. Lecture 15 is over. I'm going to press reset. It's a whole new day. Lecture 16, next theme in the course, unless there's any last thoughts on the previous paper. No? Okay. Lecture 16, Economic and Climate Shocks in Rural Households. And you're going to see that some of the topics we discussed so far are going to kind of filter into this section of the course as well. This is really the layout for this lecture and the next 3 lectures. 3 lectures from now, so in early April, there's going to be a guest lecture on income shocks and HIV in Africa. So it's going to tie together a lot of what we've been doing. We had a whole section on HIV. Today we're going to focus on this UDRI article on credit in northern Nigeria, just because it gives us really good background for how credit markets work, especially informal credit markets, and that's going to shed light on a lot of the issues we'll see in the other papers. So credit is obviously very important. Credit can do many different things. Being able to borrow can do many different things. The thing I think we think of first, and that's most obvious, is credit allows us to invest. So if I have an idea for a new business, I get investment, I get credit, I borrow from other people. If I want to buy a house, I borrow. If I want to start a company, I borrow. And then the hope is, if this idea that I have is profitable enough, I'll be able to pay back the lender. And that's the idea. I have to pay them interest, but the idea is I'm putting their money to good enough use that I'm going to earn something with it and pay them back. So that's one obvious thing that credit does. But credit does other things that are related. You can see them as an investment. It's actually a little different. In settings, such as many sub-Saharan African settings, there's also a lot of volatility of income. We talked about this a little bit before, and we talked about crop choice and how year to year you might have fluctuations in rainfall, things like that. So over time, because of the weather, because of international prices, because of your health being better or worse, your income may fluctuate a lot. And there's a lot of data on that. Individual level incomes and country level incomes in poor countries are much more volatile than in rich countries. There's a lot more volatility. So not only is the income level lower, but volatility is greater. So that's a difficult combination. And what credit may enable you to do is borrow during a difficult period so that you can pay back during a better period. So maybe just before I'm harvesting my crops, this is like a classic situation in many rural African societies. Just before I'm harvesting my crops, I've run out of food from the previous year. So in many different societies, they call this, the hungry season, the hunger season. There's basically a period just before the harvest where you've run out of food. That would be a very natural time to lend people money. If I'm going to lend you money, and I can see the crops in your field, and I know that you're 3 weeks away from harvest, I know you're going to be able to pay me back because I can see the crops in your fields. I know you have that wealth sitting there. There's just this issue of timing. You can't eat the crops until they're done growing, right? So basically, smoothing consumption is the other really major goal of credit, allowing people to sort of borrow and pay back when things are a little better for them. And if you think of, I don't know if people have personal experience lending money to friends, or if you've lent money to relatives or whatnot, either case is pretty common, in reality. Sometimes someone's just short on cash. You guys are helping your friend's consumption smooth, even when you're not thinking about it. You go somewhere, you go to lunch, and someone's like, oh shoot, I didn't go to the ATM, I'm out of money. So you give them, you buy their burrito, their urban turban, whatever, and you just hope they pay you back, right? Because you may not see them for a few weeks after that. So those are, you're basically helping them smooth consumption. Instead of them having to run back or go hungry, you're buying their food and they'll pay you back later on, right? So that's basically consumption smoothing. But sometimes people lend them, each other money for business opportunities, right? So in, the Social Network, Zuckerberg's roommate lent him $1,000 to set up Facebook or something. That's true. In that documentary. Okay, so what's the reason why credit access is such a difficult issue in Africa? It turns out, historically, and this is finally getting better now, historically banks have underperformed in Africa. Banks have had a lot of problems. The formal financial sector has been the least developed of any region in the world in Africa, and bank performance has been very bad. And what do I mean by bank performance? There's a standard measure of bank performance, which is the share of loans that are called non-performing loans, meaning the bank lent out the money and they can't get paid back. Now, maybe they didn't get paid back because growth was really slow. Maybe they didn't get paid back because they invested in the wrong businesses. Maybe they didn't get paid back because it was corruption. Whatever the reason, there were very high rates of non-performing loans, and there have been many cases of banking systems going insolvent, of bank runs, et cetera, in many different African countries. This is a problem. So when you need consumption smoothing, you need investment, you can't necessarily get it because banks don't work. And these are some numbers from a paper that's not on your reading list, but it's an NDR working paper by Kane and Rice, which said in the 90s, of course, they were focusing on this earlier period where we know growth was really slow. So this was a problem, a real problematic period for African development. The fraction of non-performing loans in some countries got incredibly high. Like 20, 30, 40% of loans in certain years were non-performing. This is just totally unsustainable. Banks can't do this. If they do this, they go under. And so there were just lots of bank runs, lots of insolvency. In some of these cases, at least, there was a view that political corruption was part of the story, that there wasn't enough regulation, that maybe politicians were getting some of these loans that they never had to pay back, maybe relatives of the leaders of the bank were getting the loans and they didn't have to pay back. And there's evidence from country after country around the world that there is a lot of favoritism in bank lending. So this was a problem. Now, with all the growth we've seen in Africa recently, there's a lot fewer non-performing loans. And there's been a very interesting trend. So, this is just really picking up steam now, but there's, for the first time, basically African banks that are spreading across multiple African countries and really establishing a brand for reliability, for customer service, all the things you would want a financial institution to do. And they're becoming international.